It was a Saturday evening in April. The kind of evening in the Bahamas where the water looks like glass and the sky turns every shade of pink and orange you've ever seen on a postcard. A Michigan couple, married, retired, living out the dream they had spent over a decade building together, decided to take a short dinghy ride. Just a quick trip across the water, from Hopetown to Elbow Cay. Maybe 20 minutes, maybe 30. They'd done this kind of thing dozens of times, but only one of them came back. And when the husband finally returned to the marina alone, hours later, he said his wife had fallen overboard, and that she had the boat keys in her hand when she went in. Now, think about that for a second. The passenger had the keys. Stick with me, because the details in this story go places nobody expected. But before we go any further, my name's Jacob, and you're watching 12 a.m. Show, where we cover real cases, real deaths, real mysteries. No clickbait, no fake drama. Just the truth, no matter how strange it gets. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now, because once this story starts, there's no stopping. And smash that like button. It takes 1 second, and it helps more people find stories like this one. I've read a lot of stories about couples on the water, but this one kept pulling me back, because everything about it, the small boat, the dark water, the story that came out after just didn't sit right. And the more I looked into it, the more I understood why law enforcement on 2 different continents felt exactly the same way. So let's go back. The year is 2026, April, and on a small island in the northern Bahamas, a place most people only ever see in vacation photos, a woman named Lynette Hooker vanished in the dark.
While they investigate American Lynette Hooker's disappearance, tonight Bahamian police have more time to detain her husband, according to his attorney.
Stand this story, you have to understand who Lynette Hooker was. Not just the name in the headline, the actual woman. Lynette was 55 years old, from Michigan. And if you know Michigan people, you know they are a particular kind of sturdy, practical, not easily rattled. They grow up around the Great Lakes. They know what water looks like, what it feels like, what it demands of you. By all accounts, Lynette was warm, active, the kind of person who didn't sit still. Her daughter Carly Aylesworth has spoken publicly about who her mother was, and the picture she paints is of a woman who worked out regularly, loved being outdoors, and was genuinely, deeply alive in the world. And Lynette documented everything. She had a 360-degree camera that she brought everywhere. If there was a beautiful sunrise over the water, she had it on video. If the sky went pink at dusk, she had it. She wanted to remember every single moment of the life she and her husband Brian had built. Because that life, it had taken a long time to build. Brian and Lynette had spent over 10 years working toward one specific dream, getting out on the open water and never really coming back to shore. They started small, a little 2-person sailboat, nothing fancy, just enough to learn, to get a feel for what they were doing. Then they upgraded, and then they upgraded again, until eventually they had a 50-foot vessel, a proper blue water sailboat that they had sailed all the way across Lake Michigan. They named it Soulmate. By January of 2026, they had finally done it. They were in the Bahamas, living aboard the Soulmate, moving when they wanted to move, anchoring where they wanted to anchor, posting to Instagram, posting to YouTube, fresh fish and turquoise cove, and 2 people who had figured out something most of us spend our whole lives trying to get to. Now, the geography matters in this story, so let me paint it for you. Hopetown and Elbow Cay are part of the Abaco Islands in the northern Bahamas. Tiny, quiet communities, accessible mainly by boat. Old-fashioned in the best possible way. Painted wooden houses. A lighthouse that's been operating since the 1860s. The kind of place where neighbors know neighbors, where everybody waves at everybody, and where the biggest decision of the day is whether to go snorkeling before or after lunch. This was their world now, And by all appearances, Brian and Lynette Hooker had figured something out that most of us spend our whole lives trying to get to. Saturday, April 5th, 2026, evening. Around 7:30 p.m., Brian and Lynette climb into their dinghy, a small, hard-bottom boat, 8 feet long, and set off across the water, headed from Hopetown toward Elbow Cay. Not a long trip. In calm water, 20 minutes, maybe 30. They'd done this sort of thing dozens of times. There was no reason to expect anything other than a quiet evening on the water. But at some point during that trip, something happened. According to Brian's account to authorities, Lynette went overboard. He says he tried to reach her. He says the winds and currents pulled them apart. He says he was unable to get to her. And here's the first detail that stopped investigators cold. Brian told authorities that when Lynette went into the water, she was holding the boat keys. That's why the engine shut off, because the keys went in with her, triggering an automatic shutoff. Now, on a small dinghy, the person who holds the keys is the person operating the engine. That's the driver. That's the one at the helm. Because if she had the keys, then that tells you something very specific about who is in control of that boat. And it raises a question that investigators were not willing to walk past. Why would a passenger be holding them? If his version is true, it's an unusual detail, a strange coincidence, the kind of thing that happens sometimes and means nothing. But if it isn't, it's the kind of detail that quietly changes the entire shape of the story. Investigators kept asking about it, and they kept not getting a satisfying answer. Now, here's the second thing, and this one is about time. After Lynette went overboard, by Brian's own account, he paddled the dinghy in the dark. Not for a few minutes, for several hours. He didn't reach the marina at Marsh Harbor Boatyard until the early hours of Sunday morning. And only then, only once he was back at the marina, did he tell someone what had happened. Only then did anyone call for help. Think about what that means in real terms. The sun had fully set. His wife was in the water. The nearest help was not far. Other boats were in the area. The Coast Guard is a radio call away. And yet, for hours, no alarm, no call, nothing. If this was an accident, a terrible, chaotic, devastating accident, then those hours need an explanation. Because the water doesn't wait, and every minute that passes is a minute that matters. Investigators had that question from the very beginning, and they never let it go. Sunday morning, 5:12 a.m., Hopetown Volunteer Fire and Rescue receives the call. They launch immediately. They search the surrounding water for 6 hours. And when the water gives you nothing after 6 hours of searching, that's when investigators start looking somewhere else. Not just at the water, at the story. The U.S. Coast Guard launches an aerial search, covering the stretch between Hopetown and Elbow Cay, scanning shorelines, working the grid. The Royal Bahamas Police Force opens a full operation, drones, professional divers, boats moving in patterns across the area. 6 hours of air, land, and sea. Nothing. By Wednesday, Brian posts on Facebook. He calls it a boat accident in unpredictable seas and high winds. He says he is heartbroken. He says bringing Lynette back is his sole focus. Now, I want to be fair about something. Grief is not a performance. It doesn't always look the way people expect it to look. And I'm not standing here telling you that what he posted tells us anything certain. But investigators were reading that post, and they were reading it alongside everything else. Then, something is recovered from the water, a flotation device. Brian reaches Lynette's daughter, Carly, by voicemail, and in that message he tells her, the flotation device found by search and rescue, that was the one he threw to Lynette when she went overboard. Here's the thing about that. Lynette wasn't wearing a flotation device when she went into the water. On a night dinghy ride, open water, the Bahamas, where the currents are strong, where the water temperature drops after dark, where the nearest shore can be further than it looks in the daylight. She had no life jacket on. Now, people take dinghy rides without life jackets every single day. That fact alone proves nothing. But pair it with the keys in the water, pair it with the hours before the call, pair it with a flotation device that was thrown after, not worn before. Investigators weren't looking at any one detail in isolation. They were looking at the picture that all the details made together. And that picture was not sitting comfortably. As the days passed, the nature of the operation began to shift. The language changed. Quietly, carefully. This was no longer a rescue. It became a recovery. Hope was fading. Brian was brought into Marsh Harbor for questioning. His attorney described him as cooperating fully. And in Michigan, Lynette's daughter was picking up the phone. Carly Aylesworth is Lynette's daughter, and what she did in the days following her mother's disappearance takes something that most people, even in moments of crisis, simply cannot find. She was in pain, real, visible, devastating pain, and she channeled every bit of it into action. She started speaking to the media. She was composed, careful, precise, and she said things that needed to be said out loud. She told CNN that her mother was an experienced mariner, not someone who stepped onto a boat for the first time and got nervous in the dark. Lynette had been sailing for years. She was physically fit and active. She was capable, strong, and sure-footed on a boat. And then Carly said something that a lot of people couldn't shake. She said it seemed very unlikely that her mother would simply fall overboard. Let that sit for a second. This wasn't a first-time boater. This was a woman who had crossed Lake Michigan on a 50-foot sailboat. Who knew how to move on a boat, how to read the water, how to hold on when the water got rough? And her daughter, who knew her better than almost anyone alive, was saying, "That is not how my mother ends up in the water." If this was an accident, then something went catastrophically, unusually wrong, because everything about who Lynette was makes an accidental fall deeply difficult to explain. And if it wasn't an accident, then we are asking a very different set of questions entirely. Carly also shared something else. She described the couple's relationship as rocky. She described what she called a history of troubling behavior, including a specific incident involving one of Brian's daughters that had resulted in a court case. She wasn't making accusations. She was placing a record in front of the people who needed to see it, and she said it clearly enough and loudly enough that those people started listening. Now, here's the moment that changed everything. The U.S. Coast Guard announced that it had opened a criminal investigation into Lynette Hooker's disappearance. Not a routine review, not a formality, a criminal investigation run out of the Coast Guard's Detroit sector, thousands of miles from the Bahamas. A separate authority running its own parallel case, because what they were seeing did not look like an accident to them either. Carly was interviewed by Coast Guard investigators for 2 hours. Her attorney confirmed it. And her attorney said something I want you to hear clearly. The family finally felt like this case was getting the attention it deserved. Within hours of the Coast Guard announcement, 2 officers from the Royal Bahamas Police Force were seen approaching Brian's yacht in Marsh Harbor, the Soulmate. They were seen securing something to the side of the boat, and that same evening, Brian Hooker was taken into custody. Now let's go back to those hours, the paddling in the dark. Investigators laid out the geography, the distance between where the dinghy would have been and where the marina was, the current speed that night, the estimated drift of a small, hard-bottomed dinghy being paddled by one person, and the numbers didn't match. The timeline Brian described didn't line up with what the water and the land and the currents said it should have looked like. That's not a public accusation. That's what was going into the Coast Guard's criminal file, quietly, carefully, but firmly. Because somewhere between Hopetown and Elbow Cay, the story that was being told and the story that the water was telling were 2 different stories. Before we go any further, I want to be honest with you, because that's what this channel does. As of April 2026, this case is still active. Brian Hooker is in custody in the Bahamas. He has not been charged with any crime. His attorney says he is cooperating. He is expected to remain in custody through at least April 14th. Lynette Hooker has not been found. This story does not have a closed ending. Not yet. But every strange detail we've walked through, every question that didn't have an easy answer, those questions are now inside a formal criminal investigation. And they deserve to be answered one by one. The boat keys. Brian said Lynette had them when she went in. That a passenger, not the driver, was holding the keys when the engine shut off. Investigators have not publicly explained that detail. But here's what it means if you sit with it. If she had the keys, then she was either operating the boat or someone put those keys in her hand. And both of those possibilities take you somewhere that she just fell doesn't cover. The hours in the dark, the geography of that stretch of water, the current patterns that night, the distance from where Lynette allegedly went in to where the nearest help was. Investigators ran those numbers, and the timeline didn't hold up, not cleanly, not in a way that answered the question of why hours passed before anyone was called. If this was an accident, a desperate, panicked man paddling in the dark, trying to get help, the water should tell a story that matches. It didn't. The flotation device, found in the water, Brian says he threw it after she went in, but she wasn't wearing one when she went overboard. Think about the order of events there. You're on a small boat at night. Your wife goes into the water, and the first thing you reach for is a flotation device to throw. Not the radio, not the engine, not anything that would bring help faster. That detail hasn't been explained publicly, but it's in the file. What Carly said, her mother was too experienced, too capable, too sure on a boat to simply fall. That statement is now part of a formal U.S. Coast Guard criminal investigation. A daughter said it out loud, and the people who needed to hear it heard it. Because somewhere between Hopetown and Elbow Cay, something happened on that water. And right now, only one person knows exactly what it was. Lynette Hooker has not been found. The water hasn't given her back. And the truth of what happened on that Saturday night in April is still, as of right now, incomplete. But it is not forgotten, and it is not going away. I want to come back to Lynette. Not the case, the woman. She had a 360-degree camera that she pointed at everything, every sunset, every morning on the deck, every stretch of turquoise water she and Brian passed through on that 50-foot boat they had spent 10 years earning. She wanted to remember all of it. She wanted to document a life she had worked a very long time to get to. And she got there. For a while. She made it to the Bahamas. She made it to the pink skies and the fresh fish and the slow, beautiful mornings on a boat named after the greatest love a person can have for another person. That is who she was, a woman who made it to the dream and who pointed a camera at every second of it so she'd never forget. And then there's Carly, who had to watch from Michigan as her mother's name became a headline, who picked up the phone and made enough noise that the United States Coast Guard opened a criminal investigation. Who stood in front of cameras in the middle of the worst thing a daughter can go through and spoke clearly, spoke precisely, refused to let the story get quiet. Lynette's mother stood beside her through all of it, 2 generations of women pushing together, asking together, refusing to let the world move on. Lynette Hooker loved the water. She loved documenting adventures. She loved a good sunrise from the deck of a boat. That is who she was, and she deserves to have that said out loud. Not just the circumstances of how she was lost, but the way she chose to live. The dream she actually reached. The camera she pointed at everything beautiful. She deserved better than what happened on that water on a Saturday night in April. And the people who loved her never stopped saying so. I keep thinking about Lynette standing on that deck with her 360 camera, pointing it at a Bahamian sunset and thinking, I made it. This is the life. I want to ask you something. Was there a moment in this story where something shifted for you? Where one detail in particular just didn't sit right? Tell me in the comments, because I read every single one, and I want to know which moment it was for you. If you believe these stories deserve to be told fully and carefully, I'd love to have you stick around. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Next time, a quiet neighborhood in suburban Ohio, a woman who went missing on a Tuesday morning, and a neighbor who noticed the curtains never opened again.